Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Coaches Corner University podcast. I'm your host, Paul O'Neid, and today I am joined by, honestly, someone I'm very excited to speak with, my friend Esteban Cruz. Esteban and I met about, oh my goodness, probably 7 years ago, maybe the first time
Yeah,
when I
when you
went
did
down
a
to
seminar at the
Miami.
X.
Yeah, I did a seminar at the Battle Axe Gym. Obviously, Esteban was a member there at the time. Didn't really know much about him other than he had a sick mohawk and he liked to train strongmen.
Yeah,
Little did I know he would eventually become the head strength and conditioning coach at Doral Academy, a very large school in Miami, Florida. And honestly, I'm really excited to talk to him about high school strength and conditioning. So, welcome.
pleasure to be on the podcast. Like I was telling Paul a little bit earlier, this is my first feature-length podcast. I've been on one podcast before for the school, run by the students. So this would be the first time kind of doing like a full podcast with someone else. So I'm really excited for it. Paul's been working with me for some time under his mentorship program. And honestly, I wouldn't be in the position I am right now without Paul's guidance. So yeah, and I know we met 7 years ago, but definitely the past 2 years have been, super instrumental in where I'm at right now.
All right, podcast is done. Got my testimonial. We're good to go. um, why don't for the listeners who don't know who you are, I'd love to go through like a little bit of a, strength and conditioning life story. Like what got you into training? What brought you to where you are today?
So, as far as strength and conditioning, I feel kind of, humble beginnings in the sense of uh, growing up, I was always pretty active. So I had two extremely loving and supportive parents that would kind of let me try out, everything, whether it be different sports. My dad was always huge on being very physically active since as a kid, he grew up in Puerto Rico, mountainous parts of Puerto Rico called the Orocovis. So because they pretty much kind of had nothing but like just farmland and rural area there, he would pretty much just be kind of hang around again, play whatever sports with whatever downtime they had available. Because for the most part, he would be working the fields from like literally, dusk till dawn from like age 9 onward, even to this day. So yeah, at one point, like I remember like whenever he would see me doing anything like playing video games for a while or anything at a young age, he'd be like, "All right, that's cool and all, but go do something
Yeah.
outside now."
Oh
So
yeah.
it always have to be kind of balanced with that. Again, if it's something indoors, you're doing something outdoors for some time. So as I got older, I was always a pretty skinny kid growing up, so I had a pretty like fast metabolism. Um, and at one point, I was like, okay, I really want to get into just kind of like filling out, getting stronger, more muscular, just kind of for like self improvement. And it was always kind of for that purpose. I had a group of friends that we kind of made like a kind of like a training group when we were in high school. We started off with just calisthenics as kind of like a base because again, my dad being super old school, he's like, nah, I'm not going to get you a gym membership or nothing. He's like, learn with what you could do, push-ups, pull-ups, dips, take that as far as you can and they'll go from there. So in the beginning it was literally like, as a teenager just doing like pull-ups, then it became like weighted pull-ups, weighted dips, like absurd amounts of volume that I think back on now. And we probably got really lucky we didn't get like rhabdo. Like I remember there was one workout where no, I'm serious. There was one workout. I remember one of my friends, George. He did it was 42 sets of 20 dips, uh, like with yeah, crazy with like only 90-second rest time in between sets. And I remember the following morning, he woke up with like a nosebleed, and he's like, man, he's like, my body feels like it's really like shutting down. And I'm like, maybe we pushed the envelope on this side of things, maybe a little bit too much. But it wasn't like necessarily smart progression. It was like, all right, let's just add a
Oh,
set
you're kids, man. At
every
that point,
single
you just crush yourselves and hope for the best.
yeah, exactly. So then when I actually got into college, I really started to research more into the side of again, kind of improving both muscularity, but then also like the strength and performance side of things. I wanted to kind of improve athleticism. So I wanted to do more so of that just to kind of feel more athletic in general. I played rugby for a little bit on my junior year in FIU. So I also wanted to do it just for the purpose of maybe being a little bit more explosive, more dynamic through movements. And I kind of started to see the carryover of how you could structure training in a sense to be able to get you the outcomes that you wanted. Not necessarily you, again, just like, being more muscular, stronger, but, increasing your vertical, which is something I tried to do for some time. And I saw that kind of worked with me. And then, funny enough, around that time, sometimes people would ask me for advice on how I, made that change. And I was like, okay, let me try, this, kind of structure, see if this works training wise for you. So I would look up sometimes on like forums like Elite FTS, and see some like kind of training plans or things of that nature. Sometimes in bodybuilding.com, instead of just the bodybuilding side of things, they would have like, sometimes like the strength aspect, the performance stuff. So I was like, okay, this seems cool. And if it made sense to me, I would usually dive deeper into it. If it kind of didn't, I would just kind of discard it. But that's kind of where it started from. And then, really, where I learned a lot more from the coaching and strength and conditioning side of things was through my coach and mentor, Michael De La Pava at the Battle
Mhm.
Axe Gym. Um, Working with him and then just seeing kind of how he coaches everything from strongman athletes to special forces guys to again anyone who just for general athletics to just your standard every gym goer. You had that kind of full spectrum. So at that point, I really just took a step back, and for many years was just kind of seeing again how he coached, attending all these different seminars like the one that you gave at the Axe, and
Mhm.
then little by little just kind of adding more and more, gathering more pieces, taking some courses, and then at that point, I was like, okay, uh, I had been teaching for 6 years at that point, and I kind of wanted to pivot into combining both of my biggest passions, which was the teaching side of things, to the strength and conditioning coaching. And the past 2 years, I've gone all in on that, and that's been amazing.
Talk to me a little bit about, meeting Mike and how that came about. Because one thing that I think, I don't think it gets spoken about enough is how important it is to choose the right mentors. And I mean, Mike's one of my best friends, so let's not pump his tires too much. Um, but what was it about working with Mike initially that kind of gave you the itch to follow in his footsteps in coaching?
Well, definitely from the beginning, it wasn't obviously the plan to necessarily follow in his footsteps, but
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah. So the way that he kind of approached it on day one was really, really funny, especially looking back at it, kind of how he's adapted his coaching style now to how it was back then. Is cursing allowed in the podcast?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, okay. So I remember I walked in because I had heard from someone I went to college with that there was a strongman gym in Florida, and at the time I was a massive fan of strongman, but I had only ever seen it on the grandest stage. Like you see
Right.
World's Strongest Man, you see these giant athletes lifting boulders, all these different things. I had never known there was a weight class. So I remember and asked someone, I'm like, oh, there's a strongman gym in Florida. Like, do you have to be a heavyweight or like, like 250 plus or anything? They're like, no, but you do have to have the right mindset for it. So I was curious. I'm like, okay. And I'm like, all right, where's this, gym located? They tell me that it's in, deep part of Kendall. So I look up the Battle Axe gym. I drive over there. This would be in December, 2016.
Okay.
So I go over there, I introduce myself. On first day, we did stones, we did keg walk, and we did I want to say it was farmer's hold. So those three elements
Oof.
kicked my ass like nothing before at that point. And in specific, when he taught me how to pick up the keg and move it and everything, I weighed 172 coming into that, and I remember this keg weighed 175. And again, I had never picked up like an odd object like that,
Mhm.
at least not on purpose. So I remember I pick it up, start moving with it. He's like, all right, now hit it, now turn. And I'm turning, I continuously move it. And at that point, I'm like, okay, do I put this down now? And he's like, all right, hit the turn. And I'm just kind of taking this for like max distance. I remember I moved it maybe about like 120 feet. And when I put it down, I'm like, I just felt spent. And then I see, someone else from the gym kind of just go pick it up and just like easily move this like crazy. I'm like, man, I need to be a part of this. Like, I don't want to be a big fish in a small pond. Like, I want to be.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing some of the other people lift here, and they're moving weights that I've never seen before. So I start talking to Mike, And on that first meeting, he told me, he's like, "Hey, you got any plans to compete in strongman?" And I was like, I didn't even know there was a competitive side for the, the smaller guys. Like, yeah, there's weight classes. Tells me about it. And my answer was, okay, I feel like, when I'm ready, maybe when I'm a bit stronger, I can jump into this. And he was like, look, let me tell you something, kid. You're never gonna fully feel ready for a lot of things in life. So it sounds to me like you're being a fucking pussy. And as soon as he told me that, I was like, all right, I'm down to compete. And he immediately, like, hook, line, and sinker, got me. That would be for Miami's Baddest 2, which was a comp coming up for 4 months after that. So he told me, he's like, look, I'm not gonna promise you by any means that I can get you to win that show or anything like that, but I can promise you you're not gonna zero, every event there. He's like, if you train hard, you're gonna find out a lot about yourself in that prep, because now you have these kind of deadlines and these kind of goal
Mhm.
weights. Like, strongman is not powerlifting where you get to pick your numbers. He's like, they have certain set weights. He's like, so guess what? Unless you want to embarrass yourself on the day, you better train hard to kind of hit those. So going into that prep, there was a lot of those implements I did not have any business being able to lift, at least at the start of the prep. By the end of it, I was able to not zero a single event, which was a big win. But just the way he approached it and immediately again called me out on that, which was the reason. He was right. I was kind of being, hesitant and insecure about it. I was like, man, this guy just read me like a book in like 1 second. So I was kind of hooked, and I'm like, hey, let's see where this could take me.
So the reason I was so curious as to your experience meeting Mike and having him as your mentor is that the same position you were in when you walked into the battle axe is the same position a lot of the young people that you coach walk
Yes,
into the weight room at Doral. You
a
know,
100%.
so
Yeah.
the roles are reversed now. And this is something that people who've never worked with youth athletes before don't really get to experience. I got it a little bit when I was in the college sector because there were a lot of freshmen who came in who had never lifted weights before, but there were a lot who had plenty of experience. When you get that person who's never walked into a weight room and you see the like wide eyes, nerves, but they kind of figure it out as they go, it's pretty special. So talk to me a little bit about how you view your role as a strength coach at the high school level.
Yeah. So I think you were spot on with the roles being reversed now. And I've taken a lot of, again, what Mike has implemented over the years, and even some of the things that he's kind of changed over the years in terms of the psychology of training athletes, and implemented a lot of that in the way I coach a lot of the students at the route. And you're right, it's very important that coaches really take into account the lasting impact you can have on a child, especially in those formative years. Because, like you said, when it clicks and when they really buy into the process, there's nothing like it. It's one of those where
So
the
special.
time in that moment does not matter to me. I've said it all the time. There's days where, like, my day feels like it's flying by, and it could be a 12, 14 hour day, because when that kid is bought into getting his first PR, he really learns to kind of dial it in, and fine tune, but also get into that mental space that sometimes the weights can take you to. It's something really special. So I think that you do need to take that from a standpoint of having the patience with them, because, like you said, there are going to be some kids that have had that experience with weights before. There are some that necessarily don't have that experience, and you kind of got to tailor a little bit to the athlete sometimes.
Mhm.
Definitely, I've noticed over time, you do have to tailor it a little bit based on gender, because the way they will
Yeah, of
respond
course.
to the certain aspects of coaching is very different. Um, but yeah, you definitely want to be able to kind of nurture that process, with while at the same time, because they're in those formative years, they're teenagers, give them that kind of push. So don't sugarcoat it. Kind of make them push themselves. Give the but all while still giving them the confidence that they need, that they should be getting under the bar.
Yeah, that was always like getting that person in for the first time, that young person, male or female. There are so many lessons that they've never learned and they're about to just drown in, right? Like they're going to be in deep water really quickly and they're going to be surrounded by a lot of people who are relying on them, like their teammates, to push themselves, and they're going to feed off of each other, and that's going to galvanize relationships. And one of the things that I always found to be the most powerful was the confidence that kids build in the weight room and then carry it forward into their school or into their personal relationships. What have been some of the biggest victories for you as a strength coach?
I think definitely one of the biggest victories that I like to, keep my head up high would be when you take a kid who maybe has been kind of brushed aside or looked down upon sometimes by coaches due to an injury, or they not necessarily look down on, but they kind of think that this kid's a little bit too injury prone. He's just maybe doesn't have what it takes there. But if they're really resilient and you just kind of give them that hope that they can come back from that injury, those have been some of my proudest moments. So one of the best examples, love this kid to death, even though sometimes he can really, really drive me nuts.
Of course.
Um, Ricardo Gaitan. So he's going to be competing tomorrow as well in the strongman competition. He came into the weight room for football his junior year. So that was when I had just started up with the football team. And I remember I'm going over some activation stuff, glute activation, like the lock five sequence. I was going over again some things for trunk stiffness, and right after we go to that, we were going to transition, into like a squat day. And when I mentioned the squats, he comes over to me kind of like privately, and he's like, oh, coach, I can't do that. And I'm like, why can't you do the squat? And he's like, oh, I have these two herniated discs. And I was like, oh, me too. And immediately he was like, and I asked him, I'm like, what disc? And he's like, L4, L5. And I'm like, oh, L4, L5. So when I told him that, he's like, wait, but you can squat after the disc herniation or the MRI they gave you and everything. I'm like, yeah. It took some time. Like, Mike helped me rehab from it. Took 8 months really, but I told him, I'm like, I'm not saying it's going to take you 8 months, but it's doable. There's a life after injury, and just the way he kind of had that look of like, okay, so this is someone who knows what they're talking about and is on the other side of that, and it didn't stop them because he had told me up to that point, doctors were telling him, you're never going to play football again, you're not going to live a normal life. He was suffering from pain, just trying to
That's
sleep.
so disappointing.
Yeah, just sitting in a chair while trying to just get through his day during classes. And as someone who's been in that position, man, it's rough to just hear someone tell you that they're just kind of taking your sport away from you, which at that age is so critical to their identity. So when I told him that, it was almost like he had like a wake up call. He's like, okay, let me trust this process and go from here. So he gave me the green light to kind of like we started like a rehab protocol for him. By about the 3 month mark, zero pain. And I told him too, I'm like, look, you're gonna have a very different approach than what these other guys are doing. I'm not gonna do just try to get you as strong as possible, because what I'd rather you be in is not be in pain and at least let you return to sport. And we did that. That was the game plan we set out. He had a great junior year in the sense, again, zero pain, was able to play through the whole time, no retweaks on his back. And then when we came out of that, we kind of set up 6 months of off-season planning where now we went from being pain-free to trying to get you back to where he was. And then, after that, he actually, was able to hit all-time PRs left and right because he had built such a strong foundation, strengthening his core, his glutes. But more so than anything, it was that confidence. All of a sudden, he can, walk again pain-free. He is not hesitant when he does something on the field. It's a very different mindset. And then after that, it's almost kind of like the proof is in the pudding. He was willing to now buy in that much more into that off-season training. He was one of those kids that then, took the nutrition seriously, took the sleep seriously, and then all his numbers were just skyrocketing.
And I'm sure
Um,
his life outside the weight room, like in class, I bet his grades went up. I bet, he's getting better
mhm.
relationships. Like, one of the things that I found so powerful about that relationship with a youth athlete is, like, in a lot of instances, you're the only person in their life who has ever believed in them.
100%. 100%.
It's it's so powerful because, you know, we don't take we don't appreciate how important it is to have someone in our lives who believes in us. And in this day and age, there are kids like, I mean, you're at a prep school, so it's probably a little bit different. But, when you go to some of these inner city schools, like, there are a lot of kids who just have never had someone in their life who's told them good work, or I'm proud of you, or, taught them how to work hard. And that's the role that you have. So, I have the utmost respect for the high school strength coach. And that kind of segues into the next part of the conversation is, Did you study exercise science or kinesiology in your undergrad?
No, so funny enough, you had mentioned again, like kind of teaching inner city or that I hadn't, yeah, I don't see the side of that too much in this prep school. So I kind of hit this really big crossroad in my life. My degree is actually in political science, and I
Okay.
was actually going to go into law school. However, I'd finished the bachelor's a little bit earlier. I had done it in 3 years, and then I kind of had this one kind of gap year. I'd taken the LSAT, and I was accepted to go in, but I had this kind of gap year where I could kind of do what I wanted just while waiting to kind of start it. And in that small gap year, I decided to not go the law school route because what ended up happening was my mom and my uncle had been teachers like their whole lives, and while I was in FIU studying, I did this program pretty much that involved you. It was called like a work study, but it was called the America Reads program. So
Okay.
pretty much you would help out these elementary school kids at like neighboring schools, kind of help teach them to read or just help out any like kindergarten or first grade teachers. And in doing so, I learned two things. First one was, I like this teaching aspect stuff a lot and kind of like mentoring the youth. The second thing I realized was I cannot do this with pre-K, kindergarten, or first grade. Like very quickly, I was like, that level of patience is far beyond my capacity because there were
Same.
some things I saw there that I'm like, nope. And knowing who you are, you kind of got to know who you're not. So when when I saw that, I was like, yeah, I can't do this with this age group, but maybe I could try something with a little bit older. So there would be some times where you get moved around, and there were some instances where like third, fourth grade, all of a sudden it's like, okay, I feel like I can kind of relate to them a little bit better, and maybe this age group could be a bit better fit for kind of what I'm looking for. So in that gap year, my uncle had told me that if you could take the social science test, you'd be able to teach kind of like middle school civics and history and things of that nature as a 3100, which kind of means you're like a substitute teacher, but in the classroom for a teacher that may be on leave or anything like that.
Hmm.
So that first year, I taught in the school downtown, and I was covering for a teacher on medical leave. So I was teaching civics and U.S. history to sixth and seventh graders. And funny enough, like how you mentioned that sometimes you kind of take this role as like a role model or like like a mentor, kind of without knowing it. Again,
Oh
I was
yeah.
doing it to kind of fill in the gap year. I'm like 21 years old at the time, about to turn 22, and all of a sudden there was a lot of these kids that sometimes didn't have a father figure or didn't have like a mentor, someone to really listen to them. So that was also the first year that I started training strongman with Mike. So I would drive from downtown all the way into like the deep part of Kendall, but because the rush hour traffic was so bad, I'd kind of wait for it to die down a little bit. So sometimes I would stay after school. Some of these kids would be asking questions. It could be on any topic. And I would just kind of listen in on what they had to say. It was a pretty small school, so you kind of really get to know some of these kids. Class size was maybe like 16 to 20.
Oh,
And in this, you again kind of really knowing these kids, answering those questions, just listening to them, I really kind of realized, okay, this goes a lot further than just teaching, and it gave a whole new level of respect for teachers. And again, growing up around my mom and my uncle who were teachers, they had always mentioned this, but it's very different when you're in the classroom and kind of seeing
oh
it
yeah.
happen before your very eyes. So then when I was about to leave as a 3100, so like kind of where my time was up, the teacher had extended her medical leave, and I stayed for an additional like 3 months. So I bonded with these kids a lot further. You know, going over basically all the material, but doing like these kind of fun, more exciting, like engaging kind of activities, and it kind of like motivated me to do more of that for them. But then afterwards, when I was gonna leave, so pretty much when the teacher was returning from medical leave, a lot of these kids started breaking down. Like these kids that I got to know, and they kind of looked at me as a role model. Like legitimately, a lot of them cried. A bunch of them like wrote these letters. They made a big poster. My sixth period that I was teaching at the time, they had all pitched in and gave me an Xbox One, which I'm not really big into Xbox, but like
That's pretty
all these kind
cool.
of super cool, super cool. And I started breaking down and kind of like crying. They made a 10-minute long video that still have like on a USB where all of them kind of like saying goodbye or something positive. Like all 87 of them total. So it was like
Holy
crazy.
shit.
It really like, yeah, it hit. And after that, I'm like, you know what, man, like, maybe the monetary value isn't in this, but man, if I've done this much of an impact in 6 months, like I want to see where this could take me. If I dedicate maybe like 4 or 5, maybe 6 years, like let's just see where this goes. So I had a very big switch of career paths at that point, and I pivoted towards the teaching route. Um, and then because I got surplused out of that school, I then had to look for work elsewhere. And then that's when I applied to Doral Academy, which was my old high school and middle school. And then it just kind of ended up being a really cool fit. And I taught there until I transitioned into the strength and conditioning side of things.
So I'm glad you mentioned the monetary piece because that's always something, one of the things that I try to do with the podcast is showcase the different ways in which we can be strength coaches or nutrition coaches or, whether online or in person or in high school. I've had a bunch of college strength coaches on here as well, a bunch of educators. And you're actually the first high school strength coach that I've had on.
Oh, okay,
What
okay.
what does the financial compensation package look like for a teacher versus what does it look like for a strength coach? And how have you made it? Like, you don't have to mention like specific numbers of how much you make, but how have
Mhm.
you gone about kind of obviously being conscious of earning additional revenue, but what did it look like without the other things that you're doing?
So if we were talking about just kind of baseline revenue, there's a few things that have kind of worked in my favor, obviously due to the years that I had built and the rapport with the school teaching
Hmm.
wise. So if I was just strictly doing the strength and conditioning coaching, it would have been a little bit of a dip, obviously, from what I was making as a teacher. But I've kind of made a blend of both in the sense of I teach the weight training class as an elective, but obviously it's a pretty good fit as the actual strength coach to be able to
Right.
teach the weight training course as an elective, so that helps me out in that sense. And then coaching the different sports is after school, so from like that 2:30 to that 6:30 mark, I'm actually making more now total between both of those things than I did individually as just a teacher. But like we were saying, the biggest thing is that outside of just the monetary aspect, I'm spending all the hours pretty much doing what I want to do
Hmm.
fully. It's kind of the best of both worlds. Like I get to do the teaching aspect with the coaching aspect. So those are my two biggest passions there. So again, there's moments where again when someone's on the barbell, they're hitting a PR. All this, I mean, those moments just feel like time is flying by, and I'm not even aware of it.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned, the dual occupation between, well, I'm a teacher still, but I am the strength coach. And just for full transparency here, what does
Mhm.
an average day look like for you? And be honest.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. So average day, um, I'll be up at about 4:30 in the morning. Okay. After that, I'll head to the school, and by about 5:15, I have anywhere between sometimes 10 to about 15 athletes that train with me in the morning. So we do kind of like before school sessions, so 5:15 to 7. From 7 to about 7:30, I have a small window to just kind of use the school showers to shower, get ready, immediately start kind of teaching. So I start handling the weight training course, which is an elective course, and I'll have a full schedule of students there from 7:30 till 2:30. So that may include, in some instances, there was the lecture portion. There's also instances where they'll keep like a training log, and then they'll just kind of write down the exercise they're doing for the day, for the rep and set schemes, and try to kind of progress some of those movements, vary the movements up, whatever the case may be, we're doing a class. I have a lot of athletes that also can take that course as an elective. So sometimes it kind of helps them because those athletes might be able to get their workout that they would otherwise have to, stay way later after school to do so. So they can just, after that, just eat, go home, recover, or, just be ready to have their actual practices. Um, After that, 2:30 really depends on the season. So for example, fall tends to be my busiest. A fall schedule, I may be in there 2:30 after school all the way till sometimes 7:30. Since football is a really large group, sometimes we have to run double sessions, as in like there's a group pre-practice and then a group after practice. Those are things that didn't necessarily happen my first year there, but it's something we adjusted just because as well as you know, I'm sure in the college section, when you have a room filled, let's say, of like 50 some odd kids, there's no way you could kind of keep an eye on everything they're doing and then kind of holding them accountable to a similar standard. So what we did is just kind of break those groups up, and I'm like, I know my time slot says I'm only supposed to be here till 6, but I'll stay a little bit later and let's get the work in that these guys, the quality work in that these guys need to get. So we would kind of, split that group into two, and then we'd have groups running in the in between. So like wrestling, basketball, girls volleyball, all the different sports kind of in between. So, fall, my schedule can go all the way up till 7:30 in the evening. Sometimes in the spring, it can be down a little bit towards like that 6 p.m. mark, sometimes 6:30, depending on some teams like baseball that kind of come in there later. So it kind of varies on the day, but yeah, usually like always start off at like that 5:15 mark with that morning group, and then kind of go from there.
So you're working consistently 14-hour days.
Yeah, anywhere shortest than 12, long and 14.
And how many teams do you work with?
Typically, if we're counting like
Yeah.
year round, 11 to 12.
Yeah. So this is not, if you were to calculate dollar per hour, it's not a very lucrative career. But when you love, the old adage, when you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. And one of the things that you and I have been working on in the mentorship capacity is finding a balance, between pushes and pulls, finding a balance between investing time into yourself and still being able to show up every day and do the best you can for those kids. Because, I speak from experience. The reason I left college strength and conditioning was because I couldn't find a balance. I was working those 90-hour weeks and I was, completely disconnected from the rest of my life and myself. And my mental health took a big hit. And, we've been in instances where you've been in a similar situation, but
100%.
because I've been able to kind of prep you for that, you've been
Yeah,
able to
yeah.
mitigate it.
Mhm.
Talk to me a little bit about some of the barriers that you've faced as a high school strength coach, whether with administration or with, your own lifestyle. Like, what have been some of the challenges that you faced?
Definitely, I would say some of the challenges can come from a scheduling side of things. So, because of obviously the fact that you can only fit so many teams and you can only dedicate so much time to each individual team, but you have a block of, let's say, that 2:30 to 6, like on paper, right? That's where kind of some of those other changes had to be made. Where I'm like, you know what? I don't feel I'm giving the best value to these kids or to these sports teams if I try to just squeeze them all into, let's say, like, these 45-minute sessions or even like a 30-minute session. Absolutely not. And I'm not going to change my standard just to try to, somehow make this schedule on paper work. I would rather set the standard of self very high and then kind of adjust what's needed around it. So
Mm-hmm.
that's where kind of some of these morning sessions started. So at first it was just like a 6 a.m. to 7. Then, all of a sudden there were some kids that were willing to do a 5. And I'm like, man, if a kid is willing to do a 5 a.m. at the age of, 16, 17, as a grown man, I can wake up a little bit
Hell
earlier and
yeah.
do 5 a.m. and push that that aspect that much more. And again, that's another aspect where like you mentioned, um, it carries over far beyond the weight room. If a kid is now willing to change his habits and get up earlier in the morning to come train at 5 a.m., like that's hard every single day. There's no way around it. Like you don't just wake up. Well, I mean, not many people will wake up at, let's say, like 4:30, jumping out of bed, ready to go. A lot of times they're not always at least walking in with the best energy. But as soon as they step into that room and they start kind of feeling that energy, they're like, no, no, we're getting after it, we're pushing. And now you have buddies of yours that are holding yourself accountable to that. Or if someone misses a morning session, they're like, yo, why weren't you there today? Now everyone's kind of leveling themselves up, and that's kind of the environment I tried to create. So some of the barriers was being able to give those teams the adequate amount of time, and then, like you said, finding that balance. When can I push? When can I pull? How can I find a way to, within my own personal life, to be able to fit, this kind of scheduling? And a lot of that did take a lot of kind of making the mistakes at first. And one of them was kind of, again, trying to just strictly leave that time for coaching. Eventually, what it became came down to was I would train, at that 5:15 time with that group, because they eventually were able to kind of, as much as you can coach certain things, a lot of those kids are going to learn by action.
Yeah,
So
of course.
that group that gets up that early in the morning would kind of start training with me, in the sense of we're not doing this necessarily the same workout, but I'm training, I'm getting after it, whether it's competition or off season prep, to the best of my ability. And once they kind of started to see, like, the effort and intensity that I'll put into the bar, whether it be to, like, an AMRAP set, or like pushing to real failure, or things of that nature, they're able to see, like, okay, that's the standard. That's where I need to get to, and that's where we're going to hold each other to. So, there were some instances where it shift from just a strictly, like, only, kind of coaching visually, to, you know, coaching, but still kind of also showing them that kind of coach athlete balance as well. That, just because, I'm a coach, and, I'm in this stage in my life, doesn't mean you ever kill that athlete part of yourself. You can still push yourself, physically and mentally, to the same capacity.
What about with the administration? Because strength and conditioning tends to be something that's a little bit overlooked by administration. We're just meatheads. We're just out there. We're just out there crushing weights. And for a lot of old school kind of admin people, they might not be as open to investing into a strength coach in a strength and conditioning department. How have you kind of broke the mold in that regard?
That was very interesting you mentioned that, because that was something I was kind of maybe prepped for, and then you had mentioned that might be a barrier in that field. Um, but it ended up kind of being a little bit more on the flip side. So the way that I got into the field was kind of like a trial run, you could say. It
I
wasn't just
remember.
hired on the spot. What ended up happening was, and again, this was kind of a luck of the draw, if you could say. I kind of landed into the strength and conditioning field, at least with Doral Academy. I had already started doing some strength and conditioning work for Ronald Reagan High School with their basketball team through a friend of mine, where he kind of gave me the opportunity to help out that kid's that team's basketball team. So what I started to do was I ran their off-season programming. I did their in-season programming as well, all throughout the season. I would do activation warm-ups for them prior to games. And that year, along with really good coaching staff, they went from like the previous year, I think they had like a 2 and maybe 21 record or so, to
Woof.
like flipping it to going 500. Like I think we're just at 500, if not one over. So it was either like 11 or 12 and 11 was the
Hmm.
mark. And a big part of that was, now physically, a lot of those kids made really big leaps and bounds. Like, a lot of them improved their vertical, they got faster, they got stronger, and that gave them at least a bit more of a competitive edge with the pieces they had. Um, because of some of the work I did there, I was at that point in time pretty much kind of done with teaching civics and U.S. history, and I really wanted to go all in with the strength and conditioning coaching. Like, I really loved working with that team, and I wanted to go all in that. And I was kind of taking the gamble, in the sense of I was ready to resign from the teaching position, and I was like, I'm going to find my way and just hopefully make it work as a strength and conditioning coach. Um, June comes around, June 2023. And one of my assistant principals, who I have a very good relationship with, Daniel Gonzalez, he had informed me that the strength and conditioning coach at the school was leaving. So he had put in his 2 weeks notice, and he was like, "Hey, look, I know you're looking to potentially do this, like full time. Would you want to do strength and conditioning here at the school?" And immediately I jumped on board. I was like, "Absolutely, yes! Like,
I
I'm in."
remember that. I remember that because you and I started working together because you're like, listen, I'm going to quit my job and I want to do online coaching while I do strength and conditioning with this school. And then 2 weeks later, you're like, oh, by the way, I just got offered the job at my own school. I
Yeah,
was like,
yeah,
oh,
yeah.
okay, I guess we're pivoting here.
Yeah. It was a, I mean, crazy switch around the mark, because at that moment, again, I was having some talks with some other schools, because I thought I was going to have to transition to that, since they had Doral Academy had a strength coach at the time. And but yeah, he had put in his resignation because he was leaving out of state. And then um, Daniel Gonzalez gave me the opportunity, and then the principal, Carlos Ferrals, he had told me, he's like, look, we're not going to jump the gun right away and just give you the job flat out. He's like, I'll give you from here till July 30th to kind of prove yourself. So I see that the dates and times as they're scheduled, and immediately I'm like, man, I got 6 weeks to prove myself, and I also happened to be out for 10 days because I had a Pfeffer Power Week, which is a strength festival in Norway, planned with Mike and
I
one of my best
remember.
friends, Felipe. And so I'm like, okay, so I really got 4.5 weeks to prove myself out of these six, to do as much of a turnaround as I can and lock this job in. Thankfully, it all worked out extremely well because I was able to do that week, which was one of the greatest adventures ever. We ended up at one point summiting the peak of Northern Europe through climbing Galliphagen and crossing a glacier. It's a really cool story. And when I came back, I was able to continue right where I left off. So I had 6 weeks to kind of do a big turnaround. So one of the biggest things was I kind of just it kind of took charge of that weight room and pretty much created the environment like how I mentioned. When you come in here, we're here to work. It's not okay. We're just gonna lollygag. We'll have fun with it, but we are here to work. We are here to improve ourselves and get better. And up until that point, the culture of the weight room was very different. Some of these kids were like, okay, I can just look at what the workout is on the board, kind of just do these movements for the sake of doing them, to say I did them, and then just walk out. And what I wanted to, kind of show them was no, no, no. Everything we're going to do here has to be with a specific intent behind it, right?
Hmm.
So if we're doing the activations and these warm ups, right, it's to make sure that you're in a better position to be able to now execute the main movement of the day or these strength movements to the best of your ability. So everything from a warm up to first teaching the kids how to brace. Like they didn't even know how to diaphragmatically brace. So that was a big thing that immediately I'm like, all right, let's take a few steps back. And I told them from the get go, look, my goal is to get you guys as strong, as powerful, as explosive as possible, but I also want to do it without any injuries, or at least minimizing that chance of injury as much as possible. Because the last thing I would want is for a kid to have all this confidence getting better, and then now their chance of injury skyrockets. And that's one of the things that the coaches had actually approached me about beforehand. For example, the basketball coach at the time told me the previous year, he's like, I had half my team, 8 out of 15 kids
Yeah,
were sorry, 7 out of 15 kids were injured. Football team, a lot of them had issues with their hip adductors, hip flexor. So I spoke with the athletic trainer and I'm like, look, just give me some of the biggest trouble areas that maybe the coaching staff has had before, just so I kind of know what I'm coming
of
into and
course.
what I can adjust from there. And immediately I had those turnarounds. The kids themselves, because it's one thing to say you're going to change and minimize injury, but the kids themselves started to say, "Oh, I feel better after doing this. This warm up, this activation. Right? Like my hips feel more loose. I feel like I could get into a deeper position on a squat. This movement feels much more comfortable for me to do so now. Some of these kids were taught, like for example, a universal way to, let's say, do a squat pattern. Not adjusting for femur length or their leverages. Now all of a sudden I'm like, hey, in your case, maybe just shift your shoulders a little bit forward, tips your hips a bit more back, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, this feels way better. It doesn't feel like I'm like off balance. Those little changes that now they're actually thinking about the movements when performing them was one of the biggest difference makers. And thankfully the coaching staff pretty much was able to notice the turnaround very quickly, had spoken very highly of me as well. And then administration pretty much gave me the green light. So by that July 30th mark, they're like, all right, we love what you're doing here. You're hired. And in fact, they told me that they were going to invest heavily into the weight training room for kind of years to come. And then
Well,
the following year,
they built a weight
yeah,
room.
yeah, exactly. So going into this year, so 2024, 2025 school year, that summer we made a lot of big renovations to the weight room, and honestly I was very flattered because I had only up until this point been doing the strength and conditioning full time for 1 year, and they told me like, look, you let us know what pieces of equipment you want, and if you can defend and you can give us a good reason as to why, you're good to go. So they let me pretty much expand the weight room with the equipment that I wanted. I went with Elite FTS for the the brand and the equipment that I wanted from there.
Shout out Elite
um,
FTS. Sponsor
yep.
me.
Sure. So yeah, no, their equipment's amazing. So they gave us, though they gave me the green light to get two belt squats, which were huge. I love those machines. Chest supported row, some extra lat pull downs, We were able to get extra sets of dumbbells, 45-degree back raise, Nordic curl machine. We were able to get a lot of good pieces that pretty much, again, if I had the green light for, they were able to accept. We got some specialty bars, which are amazing. So some safety squat bars are great. Swiss bars to kind of help out the football players for shoulders, so they can again cue external rotation better. Like all these different pieces, they pretty much just gave me the green light, and they're like, look, whatever you need here, like it's all yours. Again, if you defend and you can work with it, we're good to go. So they not only had said it and kind of spoken those intentions the year prior, they really followed through with them, and made me a huge part of that process throughout.
So you mentioned, in this 6 week, we'll call it a probationary period,
Mhm.
you didn't start necessarily by revamping training programs or like diving into that. It seemed like you leveraged culture first. You leveraged
Yeah,
the weight room as a means to build culture around that team environment. What are some of the things that you've found to be most impactful in your work from a culture standpoint?
I would say probably the biggest thing, and again, credit to Mike here. Um, it was definitely the accountability. So for a lot of these teams, there was not a culture of accountability in the sense of, okay, we're coming into the weight room, we're here to work, but maybe from the coaching standpoint, from the previous strength coach, but also from the team themselves. It's one thing for a coach to tell you, okay, you guys need to step it up, you need to be better at this. It's much more different when a teammate themselves is telling you, hey, like we got to really step up here. Like I need you to put in a bit more work. Like if we really want to improve this, this coming season, we all need to hold each other to a certain standard. So as soon as I kind of was able to get some of maybe these older players to buy in, and then the older players were now able to get some of the younger guys to buy in, it pretty much just became like a cyclical thing. Like at that point, we got some seniors, some juniors that are really getting after it. They're helping the sophomores. The sophomores are helping the freshmen, and pretty much at that point, it just makes your job that much easier. It's almost like you have these kind of assistant coaches that are kind of running the floor for you as well. So the biggest thing was just getting those kids to kind of buy in. So a lot of those older guys, credit to them, were extremely pivotal. So kids like Ricardo Gaitan that I had, Jason Lopez, Oscar Hernandez, Alex Moscoso, Omar Garcia, a lot of these guys that were key players. George Pardo, one of my baseball players. Shout out to them. They really helped to kind of create that culture with me. So I credit to them. I could not have done that alone. I think those kids were a much bigger part of that than I was, in the sense of they were able to hold that standard for each other. And if your team captain is doing that for you, or you see your team captain staying an extra 30, 40 minutes doing those kind of things, it just makes everyone want to elevate their game. The last thing you would want is to be on a team and you're holding everyone back.
Yeah, that's one thing that there's a lot of different kinds of leaders, right? So there's leaders who lead by example. There's
Mhm.
leaders who lead by experience. And I think the best kinds of leaders can do it all, right? So I'm never going to ask someone to do something I've never done, I'm not willing to do, or that I can't do,
Yeah,
right? And I think and even the fact that you train in the morning with these kids,
yeah.
they see you in the trenches. And that's, when I got to South Florida, no one would listen to me. And then I had a conversation with Ron, the head strength coach. And he's like, "Yeah, you need to compete in something because these kids don't know what you're capable of. Why would they trust you? You're just a white kid from Canada." And so I told everyone, I was like, "I'm going to do a powerlifting meet." And so they saw me training for my meet. They saw me getting stronger. They saw me in the weight room. And then all of a sudden they were like, "Oh, this dude knows what he's talking about." And then they started to listen. And I think culture and accountability for youth is so impactful because they see how much, controlling variables makes a difference. They see how much because the weight room is the one place in the world where hard work equals success. You could work your butt off in business and still fail. You could work your butt off in literally anything, but the outcome is always outside of your control. If you work your ass off, the weight on the bar is going to go up.
100%.
And
especially at their age too, because
oh,
at their age, it's a lot of it is not all the nuances of programming and everything. Like, trust me, I love the nerdy side of things and getting into the weeds of it. But at their age, a lot of it is, all right, if I just train really hard and just push some of these sets to what I didn't think I was capable of before, I'm getting stronger, I'm growing. So like you said, it's that perfect kind of correlation. If I do this, it gives me this, that cause and effect, and they buy in as soon as they see the results. I mean, there's no better selling point than the kids just being like, okay, I'm 10 pounds heavier, I can move 20 more pounds on the bar. That's like your immediate gratification right there.
talk to me a little bit about the fact that you didn't have a formal education in strength and conditioning. What have you done to educate yourself and pursue continuing education in the space?
Okay, so from that standpoint, I knew I didn't have a formal education on in strength and conditioning coaching. So again, the years learning from Mike, but then also jumping on the opportunity whenever he had guests speaking. So uh, especially in those earlier years in the acts, Mike was huge on always. He used to always say this phrase. He's like, "This place is only as good as its dumbest lifter." So he was very big on the education side of things, just as much as the training side. So many times there would be, he would always have a Saturday morning kind of speech before training. There would be a lot of times where he would assign homework as well. So there would be some instances where it'd be like, okay, he'd kind of give updates of what's going on with the gym, scheduling, things of that nature. But then towards the tail end, it was always like, all right, you might need to watch a certain video or read, from here. When he would sometimes get into the why he would write certain things out programming wise, I was always super interested in that. So sometimes I would ask, certain questions. And obviously in the beginning, you're kind of just, again, just kind of absorbing, taking this all in. But later on, it's kind of like, okay, let me see if I can provide a little bit of input, have an actual discussion in this, and kind of learning from there. So, credit to Mike. A lot of the times I would take what he would say and then kind of just expand on that. But there were many instances in which, again, if he assigned the homework, I was immediately going to watch that video. I was going to try to learn more about it. Whenever there was a seminar and any guest, I was first to kind of sign up and immediately attend it, or move pieces around if I needed to attend it. And then on top of it, um, I was also kind of always continuing education on my own. So maybe there was not that formal side of things, but I was taking, courses until up until that point, until I felt like I was going to be ready to actually jump into that and provide value. So, for example, I would take on, MST systems courses, which is like kind of more of a strongman, but kind of strength athlete programming one.
Hmm.
So taking two courses like that, I was kind of always continuing education in some fashion, whether it be listening to a bunch of different podcasts from, again, just reading, buying different, again, training manuals. So whether it be Westside Barbell, Christian Thibodeau, things of, from coaches, obviously, that know far, far more than me. And then again, just kind of blending all of that. Like you said, some of the biggest parts is those that kind of lead by example and that experience as well. So whenever I would get those chances to kind of soak that all in, I would really try to take that. Mike was always big on us as well, having, training journals, things of that nature. So on the seminars, I'd be writing down notes and seeing what I can take from that and kind of apply.
I love it. Um, let's shift gears a little bit. You're competing tomorrow.
Yeah,
You gonna win?
that is the plan. Yes, sir. Feeling good. This prep was really good. Feeling confident. Yeah.
Yeah, you didn't detach your
Like,
retina this time.
yeah, I'm trying. Fingers crossed. Hopefully it stays attached.
um,
And
what are the events this weekend?
okay, so the events for the strongman competition, there's five. Starting off with the press medley. So the press medley for my weight class is 215 barbell. So you have to, clean and then press it three times. You immediately then jump to the axle bar. So a 2-inch bar, fixed axle, meaning that it does not rotate. 215, you clean and then press that two times. And then you go from there into a 235-pound log and just clean and press that overhead one time. Um, you try to do that in as fast as time as possible. You only have a 1 minute time limit. That's
Okay.
the first event. Second event is the yoke to sandbag. So it'll be a 700-pound yoke for 40 feet. Sprint back take a 250-pound sandbag and load it over the yoke. So there's a little bit of strategy here in the sense that you could potentially change your yoke height to be a little bit lower so that you have a much, kind of easier time maybe extending with the sandbag, or you keep your yoke height and then again it's a little bit harder on the extension to to load the sandbag over. um the next one is the deadlift to reps, so it'll be 455 for reps. Straps are allowed, so strongman rules, so no sumo, has to be conventional. And then again it'll be up and down commands, 1 minute time limit. um After that one it'll be the burden run, which has become very infamous with Miami's baddest. So
I remember
it'll
watching it
be,
last year.
oh yeah, yeah. This one's a doozy. This one is probably one of my favorite events because it's one of those that really puts you into deep waters. You don't have the choice to go into it and kind of even really strategize in the sense of, oh, I'm gonna kind of pace this one out. It's kind of like, you gotta go all gas, no brakes until you can't. So it's gonna be a Husafel stone for my weight class, the 175-pound weight class. It'll be the 275 Husafel stone. Yeah, 40 feet with a 40-foot turn. So there's a little kind of twist to it this year where we're actually hitting it with turns. So it's 40 feet, turn, bring it back 40 feet. 225-pound farmers, 40 feet, turn back 40 feet. Then go to the heavy sled. I don't know the weight of the sled. It's just heavy-ish in that sense, which is very common in strongman. Sometimes it's just heavy or there's an ish kind of to it. So that one will be for 40 feet if you can get it across that line. Which historically in the opens there might be one or two people total that might get that one over the line. I've done that one before and I've gotten it to about halfway, which I remember the year that I did that one, that was good enough for second. So it's a very heavy sled pull to do so at the very end of the of that whole medley, because you also have a 1 minute 30 time limit. And then the final event, which this is the one I'm really, really like. I love stones. It was one of the reasons why I jumped into strongman initially. There's just something primal about Atlas stones. So it'll be a potentially a lighter stone and a heavier stone to shoulder. And in my weight class, the lighter stone is 225, and then the heavy stone is 275. Any weight with the 275 would trump lighter reps with the 225. So I'm going right for the 275.
I love it. Um, Last question. If you had a billboard on the side of the highway with a message on it that everyone could read, what would it be?
Billboard with this. Oof, that's a tough one. Okay. Um, Train hard, but don't detach your retina. No, I'm kidding. It would definitely be. It would definitely be. I guess if, kind of say strength and honor, and then I would put under it, changing the standard of self in the
I like
sense
that.
that, again, bringing it kind of all back to the lessons that you gain under the barbell above all else, and in the weight room, the lessons you can apply from there can really change your standard of self. Like I'll tell you firsthand, training has been paramount in the lowest portions of my life just as much as it's been in the in the apex of my life, which is why it's always been a staple. When training is that one constant that you can kind of look to, whether it be again even coming back from an injury. Like I remember instances where I tore my pec, but now the challenge of coming back from something uh, teaches you that much more about yourself. Whether it's coming back from a disc herniation, the kind of struggle, everything trying to get back to your best. You can apply that, take that lesson, and push way farther than you ever had. Like I said, I didn't come into this field thinking that I was going to be a strength coach at the beginning. I was just looking to then pivot, add value, and kind of give back in a sense. And the more I've always kind of pushed in that direction, the better things have worked out for me, in my life. So I think if training has given that aspect to me, I'm sure, and I've seen it happen before. It's done that for so many people. So if we can take those lessons, apply, I really do think you can change your standard of self, and then you can again give back more and provide value, to that next person. And then if we kind of keep that chain going, it's a beautiful thing.
I love it, man. If there was one person that you would like to see me interview on the podcast, who would it be? But the caveat is that you have to help me get them on.
Hmm. Interesting. Would it be from the strength and conditioning
Who
kind
would
of?
you want to see me interview?
Yeah, being that they would have to be. Just because I think it'd be really interesting to see how they would speak and everything going on the podcast. Maybe Felipe Montoya.
Really?
Simple fact that again, yeah, he's spent his share of years as a power lifter. He's done strongman as well, and he's been there firsthand for a really long time. I feel like he's got quite a good some stories to tell and maybe a lot of info to bring, maybe from that perspective.
I like that actually. I like that idea. Dude, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you taking the time on, I know you have a busy schedule, you're competing tomorrow, but it really means the world for you to share your time with me.
No, it means the world for me too, and that's why I'm like, I feel like a good time to do a podcast like this would be when you're kind of in the trenches, about to, in
Fuck
the
yeah.
process of refeeding, about to go into the competing side of things. I figured that's kind of the time to get my brain picked.
Perfect, man. Well, I'll have links to where everyone can find you in the show notes. Everyone, please make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Thank you so much, my brother. Take care.